morning, my name is R.Ghezzi from Italy. I'm a member of the Italian team. As I told you the first day, I worked at the Regional Institute for Economic Planning, but I want to say that this is a joint effort. Rossella from the University of Florence worked with me a lot to collect all this information, to estimate all the equation that we have inside the bilateral trade model. As you can see from the title, we have here two elements. The first one is that we collect our estimation from the bilateral trade model for elasticity, price elasticities and couple elasticities. We worked a lot in the last 5 years, maybe, on the model. Actually, the model is in the third generation because the bilateral trade model was created by Agnias more than 30 years ago. So the first generation is the generation created by Agnias. The second one is linked to the name of Chang Ma, and this is actually the third generation. We did a lot of job collecting data and estimating a lot of equation, and we change a lot also the algorithm that we use to solve this system of model. But today I don't want to describe this model because we did a lot and we did in many other Inforum conference. I just want to remind you some of the main features of the Inforum bilateral trade model. That is a model that is used to simulate bilateral trade flows among countries. We have 14 countries and 4 areas that cover all the global, we have a global coverage of the world trade. We have a sectoral disaggregation with 66 sectors. We use the SITC classification. We use data coming from the United Nations, the UN countries database. And the main important aspect that is we simulate endogenously the competitiveness. Because we have an equation that I want to show you in a while that is used to move the shares in each market. And so the competitiveness of each country is endogenously simulated inside this model. But as I told you, I don't want to describe the model. If you want some information, last year we published in the Economic System Research a paper, and you can find all the information about the model inside the publication. Coming back to the title, that was the first element. The second element is Russia, or as you usually write, Russia. The main contribution of this presentation, it's not easy for me that come from Italy to speak about the Russian economy in front of so many Russian economists, but I'll try to do it. The main contribution of this presentation is to use the bilateral trade model to describe the bilateral external relationship in total terms, but then we want to go deep into the Russian economy, and we want to describe the sectoral composition, and also we present some estimation about price and non-price elasticities for the exporter that want to export in the Russian market and for Russia that want to export outside. And so both perspectives, when you import and when you export. just to start some figures about totals. We have here different colors because we have different sources. One of these is Shirov. The other one is the UN-Comtrade, the blue one, that is the data that we usually use, and we compare also with data coming from the OECD, and different sources, but the story is almost the same. And on the left you have imports, total imports of goods, just goods, and on the right hand side you have exports of goods. It's easy to recognize the effect, the impact of financial crisis in 2009, but according to this information it's easy also to recognize the impact, I want to say, of sanctions, but I don't know if it's just sanction or it's a combination of results of sanction and devaluation of rubles, because these information are in US dollars, in nominal terms. As you can see, in 2013, just before the starting point of the sanctions, Russia as destination market was the 17th. After 3 years, it was the 24th, in the 24th position in the ranking, the international ranking. If you look at the export, Russia was ranked in the 9th position in 2013 and in 15th position in 2016. I think that it's better for us when we want to study the structural future of the Russian economy to stop in 2013, because the last period maybe is a little bit biased. A huge devaluation of rubles and this sanction maybe create a sort of fog on the Russian economy. Here you have exactly the same information. Red is export, blue is import, but we have here also the green line, that is the trade balance. You have to read on the right side the number, the absolute number, again in US dollar in nominal terms. As you can see, you have a huge surplus. It means that thanks to your export, you are able to accumulate reserves in terms of US dollars. And on the right-hand side, you have the trade balance in terms of GDP. And so the share in terms of GDP it's pretty huge, and it's stable in the last period, almost stable except for the last 2-3 years. And this 10% that is a lot, is an incredible surplus, especially starting from the European point of view. Okay, that was just to describe the main figures about the international relationship that you have with all around the world. But maybe one could use this data to create an export equation to put inside your model. But I think it's better to go deep into this information, because as I want to show you in few slides, you have every economy has a lot of heterogeneity inside its economy. And for this reason, let's start to watch, to look, to focus our attention on imports. First of all, Russian imports. On the left side, we have the composition in terms of product. What kind of product you usually buy? And you buy a lot of road vehicles. Sasha, you like a lot road vehicles. And as you can see, there is a difference between these 2 years. And so this is the reason why I think it's better maybe to use data up to 2013, because the last 2-3 years change a lot in terms of sectoral composition. according to the international data that we collected from the UN. Also, here you have a big impact on road vehicles, but in terms of shares, and so in terms of composition, a lower impact in terms of equipment and equipment investment good that you buy abroad. On the right-hand side, you have the origin of these imports, and you buy a lot from China, as everyone. But in the last period, the share of China increased a lot, especially, I think, thanks to these sanctions. And so, again, in the last 2-3 years, everything is changed a lot. Combining these two information, so what kind of goods and where you buy, we have this ranking of international import flows. As you can see, Sasha, maybe you buy a lot of Mercedes, a lot of BMW, a lot of Audi, and maybe Porsche. Every year, Sasha spends something like $7 million US dollars in these cars. And it's easy to understand because in front of the hotel, almost every car is a German car. But in the second position, telecommunication equipment from China. And so this is another very important flows that come from China to Russia. Also, a lot of car, maybe Toyota from Japan, and a lot of vegetable from Ukraine and Belarus, maybe. Okay, from us, that we collect all in the rest of the world. Okay. These numbers obviously are referred to 2013, but this number, as I showed you just one slide before, changed a lot during the time, and the shares change a lot. And so I think it's very, very important to understand the movement of this share that is not stable in time. And so it's important to explain, to understand and to explain the movement of this share. For this reason, we use results that we have inside the bilateral trade model. I don't want to describe all these elements we did in the past, but I want just to focus on this element. This is the core of the bilateral trade model. It's the block where we simulate endogenously the import share. We receive information from each national model, and so we have here the US model LIFT, the Canadian model, the Italian model, the Japanese model. All these models give to the international system information about import, sectoral import, exports, price of exports, and investment. And we use this information inside this block using a specific equation to simulate endogenously the movement of each share of each producer in each market. And we obtain the sectoral export and price of imports, and then go back, this information go back to the national model. We simulate again each national model. We produce new estimation for sectoral import, price of export, and again. This is the core. This block here includes this equation that is made up of 3 elements. Oops. The first one is a sort of price competitiveness, and here we estimate the price elasticity. Here we have a non-price competitiveness. And the second variable try to capture all the effects that maybe are connected with the innovation and technology, new technology that are included in the stock, the capital stock. And here we have the estimation, the parameter that will be estimated. And at the end, we have a trend, a special trend that we call nice trend because it's a trend that is constrained to be sure that this share will not pass the the constraint of 1. And using this equation, we can explain. Here you have for auto vehicles imported in Russia. These are the movement of the shares coming from Germany, from Japan, from US, from Korea, and you can see that the shares are not stable. And to explain the movement, we estimate that equation for each producer. And here you have the results of this estimation in terms of price elasticity. Obviously, we have the intercept that includes many structural factors. But we have the price elasticities and capital elasticities. And as you can see, we have a lot of heterogeneity inside this market, that is the Russian market, inside this sector, that is auto vehicles, among all these kind of producers. A lot of heterogeneity, and so I think it's important to take into account the origin of the flows to understand what is the impact of a change in relative prices. But not just prices are important, it's important also capital elasticities, and so relative capital play a very strategic role explaining the evolution of these shares. Also here we have a lot of heterogeneity, and many times capital elasticity is important, but not every time. For example, for Germany we received an estimation that tell us that it's not important that variable to explain the share of Germany in the Russian market. Maybe it's much more important to understand that there are a lot of structural factors, maybe the preferences. You like a lot BMW and Mercedes, and maybe without any kind of consideration of the prices, you buy Mercedes and so on. But for example, for Japan, the price elasticity is higher, and you have to take into account this magnitude, not just by itself, but comparing with all the other. These are the results for auto vehicles, but we have similar results, or we have completely different results, but we have a similar estimation also for telecommunication equipment. Here you have this huge leap of the Chinese share in the US, in the Russian market, and we explain it thanks to using these parameters about price elasticities and capital elasticities. And as you can see, for example, it's not so important the price competitiveness. It's much more important the capital elasticities. It means that maybe China is competitive in Russia, not thanks to a price, a low price, but maybe thanks to a lot of investment in innovation, in technologies. We have other results for general machinery and for electrical machinery. Here you have a very strong competition among different producers, different suppliers of electrical machinery in Russia. Again, a lot of heterogeneity inside this market, and it's important to distinguish producers because the results of a change in relative prices could be really different. That was for the import side. now let's start to speak a little bit, just few slides about the export. And so when you produce something and you sell abroad these goods. Here I have to confess that we have some problem with data. Why? Because when you look at the international flows, international trade flows, you can use two different perspectives. The perspective of the exporter and the perspective of all the importers that buy from that country. And so we can observe the total exports of Russia using data collected in Russia, collected by all the firms that sell goods abroad, or we, and this is the red line, or we can calculate the total export starting from the opposite point of view, looking and collecting all the data from the importer. As you can see, there is a big difference among these two sources. These are the numbers collected considering the importer point of view. Usually, in theory, they should be the same, but in the real world, they are not the same. Every time we have differences considering both point of view. But in Russia, this difference is pretty huge. You have a difference like something like 50, 60 billions of US dollars, and it's a lot. And it could be a problem because I found that in the international statistics, almost a large part of this difference is linked to the gas sector. Why? Because I would like to explain the next slide, but I just want to stress that looking at the importer and so collecting the information from the importer point of view, we have an underestimation of the gas that we, for example, in Europe, we buy from Russia. And for this reason, I think that the red line, that is the number that come from Russia, and so using the exporter point of view, are more reliable. For this reason, we should use for gas, we should use your national information. And this is not just a problem that affected the sectoral composition. Yes, the sectoral composition is affected because, as you can see, the role of gas in the composition of export, the role of gas is a little bit lower when we consider the importer point of view, and is higher when we consider your point of view. But the problem that we discovered using this data is that the main problem is when we want to look at the composition of the destination market of your export goods sector. Why? Because as you can see here, we have a sort of underestimation if we use the exporter point of view. There is a sort of underestimation for Germany, for France, for Spain, for US. If we use data coming from the importer point of view, seems that the level of imports from Russia is high. And why we obtain these results? The reason is very simple, because inside the export goods, as I told you, the problem is for gas sector. We have a lot of information about gas export from Russia that are without any kind of destination, and are collected all in a residual area that is called not elsewhere specified. And so looking at data coming from Russia, we are able to understand what is the real level of the gas exported, but we don't know exactly where these flows of gas export goes. And for this reason, we decided to use not the exporter point of view, but again the importer point of view. The last part of this presentation is about the Russian export of oil. That is the most important sector. Here you have, on the left-hand side, you have how much is important for Russia one of these destination markets. And so, for example, to export in Germany is very important for Russia. Oil in Germany is very important. To export in Italy is less important. Here you have another information. How much is Russia important for each economies here? And so, for example, for Italy, the oil coming from Russia is very important because 20% of all the oil that we buy abroad come from you. And a similar share also for Germany. And so Germany is really very linked to Russia. Italy is not so important for you, but you are very important for us. And the opposite situation is for China. China is really important for you as a destination market, but you are not so important for China. China buy oil almost all around the world. So we have the last two slides just to compare the estimation for this opposite market, Italy as a destination market and China as a destination market. And we have here the evolution again of your export share in that market, in the Italian market, with this estimation of the price elasticities and capital elasticities. And as you can see, we in Italy, we change a lot our suppliers considering the price level. Here you have the estimation of the in the Chinese market, and at the end we collect all the estimation that we did inside this model. And so considering all these kind of disaggregation, you have to think that we have 66 sector, 18 origin and 18 destination. So how many shares, how many equation we have to estimate? It's simple, 66 by 18 by 18, and something like more than 20,000 of equation. If we collect together and we sum using weight, we sum all these price elasticity estimation and capital elasticity estimation, we obtain something like a sort of aggregate elasticity for Russia exports. And the elasticities, the price elasticities is something like 1.5. The capital elasticity is something like 0.5. It's very similar, it's not different with respect to other countries that we estimate. What I want to stress is that there is a huge difference if we try to estimate a sort of aggregate elasticity compared to sectoral elasticities that we look at before in all the slides that I showed. Just final remarks, because there is no conclusion in my presentation. Final remarks about what? About what I think it's important. It's important to take into account both price elasticities and capital elasticities. And as far as I know, there are not so many models that include these variables, the capital, inside the explanation of the shares movement, shares dynamics. And so it's important to consider both elements, price and capital elasticities, if you want to explain the movement in the market share. Then, if you try to estimate an aggregate equation, you have a lower magnitude of elasticities, both for capital and prices. If you look at the sectoral disaggregation, we have a higher magnitude of both of these elasticities. And last but not least, the level of heterogeneity is very high between sectors and among destination markets. For this reason, I think that could be a very big mistake to try to put an aggregate export equation inside a national model, because you include a sort of bias analysis inside, because you are not able to take into account all these heterogeneity. That's it. Oh my God.
Thank you very much, Leonardo, for this presentation. I will very glad to see the article with this estimation in our journal, Study Market Economic Development. Please make it. And some comments, and maybe one question. First of all, about our car industry. About 50% our car market, it's domestic production, and maybe 60% now, and 40% is imported. But in domestic production, 50% is our native historical producers of car, for example, Lada, yeah? And 50% is new production, such as Toyota, Hyundai, Kia Motors, Audi, Volkswagen.
In the past also Fiat.
Yeah, and Fiat too. Yes. And in this import of motor vehicles sector, I think 60–70% is components,
Yeah.
not the full cars. Yes, and if it's components, the situation is not so stable, yes, because it's the problem of current situation in the economy, production in car industry, and so on, so on, so on. The next comment about China import to Russia. Of course, in current situation of sanctions, the China is main producer, main partner in high-tech export, high-tech trade, yeah, with Russia. But some China products, high-tech products, is products from Europe, because these products with European technologies, with American technologies, and produced on the China territory. But finally, it's European and American products. And it's next of my point. And I have one question. Very interesting estimation of price and capital elasticity by sectors. And in China case, we could see that price elasticity for communications equipment is too low. I'm sure. Okay. But in next sector, electrical equipment, machinery and equipment, the price elasticity for China is too high, about 11 maybe. What is the reason for these results?
It's not so easy to explain. First of all, I want to tell something about your first comment. Yes, of course, we have a 66 disaggregation, 66 sectors, but we started from a data set that is huge, and so it's possible also to try to go deeper in this analysis and to decompose the auto vehicle sector, try to distinguish final product and components. About the second comment, it's true that information are related just to the gross flows of import and export. But take into account that if we include the Russian model and all the other model here in the national block, it's possible for us to simulate the impact of these flows in terms of value added, simulating each national model. And so it's possible to distinguish how much of the value added is created in China thanks to the exporting flows that China make to Russia. The last question is very difficult for us because, as you can easily understand, we have some automatic check that we did during the estimation process because we have a huge number of equations that should be estimated. And usually this is the unconstrained estimation, but usually for the model we use a constrained version of this estimation. We put a constrained on price elasticities and on capital elasticities. Why? Because using the results as you look here, maybe we obtain something that is very, very difficult to converge during the simulation. And so we have a constrained estimation of this parameter, and the level of constraint is -4 for price elasticities and +4 for capital elasticities. The reason is exactly what you say, that sometimes we have a high level of elasticity. But you have to take into account that we compare this sectoral estimation with some specific case studies, and we found similar level, sometimes also higher level with respect to our estimation. Because when you try to explain not just the total, but a specific sector in a specific market, the volatility, the volatility is very, very high.
I'm sorry, yeah, okay.
Thank you for your nice presentation. It's very interesting and I think useful. But you didn't provide any information about the quality of your statistical estimations and what model do you use. Do you have some empirical problems like endogeneity? Because the price is for sure endogenous both for imports and exports. And it is to expect that you control it. What methods?
Oh, okay. Well,
and also maybe something about determination coefficients, maybe t values or p values.
Okay, we have the t-value and we have the estimation of the standard error and the R square. Obviously, it's almost impossible to evaluate and to also to show all this information because, as I told you, we have something like 20,000 of equations. About the endogenous problem, you have to think that the share that we are using is in constant term, and so is without the here. The left-hand side variable is just in real terms, and so there is no problem of indigeneity between the explanation variable and this variable. We estimate information as unrelated equation each other, and at the end we collect all these estimation and we obtain preliminary results in terms of each share, and then we constrain this share to be to sum up to one.
Thank you.
I think maybe the time is limited because
If you want,
we
during the
can
coffee break.
discuss during the break. Okay? So thank you very much again. So